Hello, my name is Chau, and today I will be refuting the claim of fact speech made by Felix, where he states that surfing has been misclassified as a competitive sport. He defines it based on an article that he read from Sport Accord, where a sport has an element of competition to be no way harmful to any living creature, to not rely on equipment provided by a single supplier, and to not rely on any luck elements specifically designed into the sport. He heavily uses this definition in his argument, and I will heavily also use it in my refutation. His three claims are that 1, surfing didn't arise from a need for competition, unlike a lot of sports that we see today. 2, unpredictable nature of playing field differentiates it from any other competitive sport. And 3, surfing competitions are scored in a manner that is too subjective to provide any useful results in determining who is the most skillful. So my response to his claim is that surfing is correctly classified as a competitive sport, as it has developed into being one. So his first claim, surfing didn't arise from a need for competition, unlike a lot of sports that we see today. He uses examples like basketball and soccer and says that sports all arose from human need for competition. He says that surfing didn't come from the same place and that it's about a connection with the ocean. He does not cite any evidence for this. This claim is baseless. For all we know, people could have kicked or thrown around a ball and enjoyed it enough to make it into a game, and then developed it into becoming a sport and being competitive. Additionally, on the Olympic website, swimming can be dated back to the Stone Age and did not truly become an organized sport until the early 19th century. So we can see how sports don't have to derive from starting competitively, but can develop into being competitive. Also, all sports derive from somewhere, some type of activity or game, and then become popular enough to become competitive, which is arguably exactly what happened with surfing. So his claim is like a paradox, because we know that surfing is now being played competitively, which by his claim makes it a sport. Additionally, he says people play soccer to see who is the best, and that can also be said about competitive surfing. They would also be surfing to see who is the best. And then he quotes saying that surfing is for kicks, not crowds. And it's about the feeling you get when you're surfing, not surfing for other people, but surfing for yourself. This really could be said about any competitive sport. That was an opinionated stance that really doesn't give any evidence. And then he had a lot of interesting background material on surfing. However, his proof back to the claim is essentially non-existent. For his second claim, the unpredictable nature of the playing field, the ocean, differentiates it from any other sport seen today. He says that all competitive surfing takes place in the ocean. Again, there's no source or evidence for this, and when he says all, it makes me want to see a statistic. However, there's no source or statistic provided for this sweeping generalization. Additionally, there's a company called Kelly Slater's Wave Company, which creates artificial waves that are uniform and could change or even create a subculture of wave pool surfers. Meaning that surfing doesn't have to be necessarily in the ocean, because there's new technology made where it could be indoors. Additionally, he says that there might be a really big difference in size and quality of the waves, and normal competitive sport has a very even playing field. Again, no sources, no evidence. And hot air ballooning, which was once an Olympic sport that is still considered a competitive sport, has essentially no playing field. It's air. So the Olympic has revealed data to make sure that they would find a location that would be best fit for the competition, in that it has consistent types of waves and conditions. And in order to ensure quality surf, the contest will feature a waiting period of 16 days, and once the event runs, it will take 2 days to finish the competition. So we see that even though they would be competing in the ocean, the organizers take time and put research and data into making sure that they are surfing in the best possible conditions, and that the conditions would be fair for the surfers. Based on the inertia, they say that competitive surfing has always been as much about an individual's wave selection as it has been about the moves that take place on the wave itself. So the ability to read the conditions, mentally analyzing and computing the slightest ripples on the surface of the ocean is all a part of the sport, and therefore the need for the ocean as a playing field is essential. His third claim is that surfing competitions are very subjective in the way that they are scored. Felix says that every time a surfer catches a wave, a panel of judges decide what score the person should get on a few different criteria, and the problem is that it is opinionated. Many other sports, like gymnastics, figure skating, and competitive diving, are based on the same subjectivity. The panel of judges would be experts on sports, and like in gymnastics, they would be able to analyze the skill and technique in the player to accurately judge them. Based on the insider on how judges are selected, there's a lot of checks and balances in choosing a judge and in the judging itself. For example, in gymnastics, they throw out the highest and lowest scores because those would be the most extreme and biased scores. And so it just goes to show that even though it's subjective, there's checks and balances for it. And additionally, Felix states that Felix consistently uses basketball and soccer as examples, disregarding other sports. He quotes, if you look at a real sport, there is no subjectivity. His argument is flawed in that he makes a hasty generalization about a few sports, like basketball and soccer, and to support his claim, and uses those as the standard for all sports. He fails to acknowledge the other sports, and additionally, when he says if you look at a real sport, it shows that he has a bias on what is and isn't a sport, and therefore it's more of a claim of value. Additionally, he says there's no element of luck, and he never really goes to prove how there is an element of luck in surfing. And specifically, the definition that he gave from his source is that a sport cannot rely on any element of luck specifically designed into the sport. Surfing does not have any specific elements of luck designed into the sport. As mentioned earlier, it's based on the surfer's skills in reading the waves and their technique. So just like any other sport, players can get lucky, but that doesn't necessarily mean that luck is integrated into the sport. He quotes Brian Blickenstaff, who wrote an article where he said, surfing couldn't be more subjective, which basically comes down to opinion and luck. In a world where sports tend to be very black and white, surfing can be very gray. I visited the article, and this quote was taken out of context. Brian Blickenstaff essentially writes about how he really doesn't know whether or not surfing is a sport. The whole article is about him deliberating if surfing is a sport. And so I searched him up to see if he was a credible source. And on his website, in the bio/about me section, he states a lot of credibility in his background as a writer, but he has no specific education in surfing or about sports in general. So, in conclusion, surfing is correctly classified as a competitive sport. It may not have started as a competitive sport, but it has developed into one. Additionally, there's no evidence to state that the sports must have a consistent, even playing field, and the sport of surfing is meant for the ocean, as the sport entails the surfer's ability to analyze waves and their technique in riding waves. The claim that surfing is too subjective to be a sport is ineffective, in that there are many other sports that have subjectivity in judging, and that there are checks and balances to make sure that judging is fair and accurate. Additionally, the argument cited a solid 2 pieces of evidence throughout his argument, which are from quotes with no actual data, so they're not really even solid pieces of argument or evidence. And so his proof is essentially non-existent, and the whole argument itself is unreliable and is mostly based on opinion, which, as a whole, his claim of fact speech seemed more like a claim of value speech. Thank you. Oh, I speak more.
That's okay. The structural stuff is fine. I think you get caught up in some minutia that really isn't all that critical. The argument that there's a lack of evidence from the advocate, I think that's important. The whole discussion about whether or not he's critical or biased about particular sports, I don't really think that that gets you very much. The questions, though, I like the idea that you're using the same definition. That's appropriate. That whole idea on that first point that it grows out of necessity, I'm not sure why that's an important point. If you're willing to concede it, or excuse me, not concede it, but say, but that applies to other sports also that don't necessarily work that way. It's a challenge. It's a reasonable challenge. I just don't know that it gets you that much. I thought your better arguments were on the second and the third points, which definitely have some substance to them that you can contrast with what the advocate is talking about. I like your information on the Olympics and how they attempt to create a level playing field under the circumstances that they have to play in the best possible conditions. I also like the argument that you're making here that suggests that it's really about being able to read the ocean. That makes a lot of sense. The comparisons of this sport to other sports where they do these sorts of things, that seems reasonable, and it's experts who are making those particular judgments. That seems reasonable also. Your argument is 8 minutes and 43 seconds, so it's, almost 3 minutes overtime, which is 50% greater. You need to make some choices. You need to pick and choose which issues you're going to focus on. I think that's the big problem here. Not that anything you said was wrong, but it's just sometimes it doesn't get you that much to spend that much time on those issues. All right, thank you for sticking around for the